Hey there, best of trekkers! We're going headless today because one of my green screen lights died. So, we're going to try this while we have a look at Starfleet First Contacts on this edition of...
Yeah, it's the best five, worst five, know what I mean? Yeah, it's the best five, worst five treks ever seen.
One of Starfleet's major tasks is to seek out new civilizations, and we've seen a pile of first contacts with a wide range of outcomes. This category is relatively subjective in its ranking, but I've based them on how interesting the first contact with a particular species is, and what the broader effects of the future contact look like. As usual, we're starting at the fifth worst, the Wadi. Along with being DS9's worst episode, one of the few official pre-sanctioned first contacts we see on screen goes quite weirdly in Move Along Home. Having Starfleet officers pulled into a game they didn't even know existed just because Quark is a grade A swindler certainly isn't a great way to start overtures while meeting a race for the first time. I honestly find it interesting that we learn in Lower Decks that the Federation has had more contact with this crazy race that values sticks as currency and doesn't mind randomly subjecting groups of people to a game that feels like it has high stakes, only to later find out it's just a holodeck where the safeties actually work. Number 4. The Kazon. Voyager's initial episode, Caretaker, sees Janeway jumpstart her career as the captain with the most first contacts in a century by meeting the Okampa, Nassine, Talaxians, and Kazon. The latter of those would go on to be Voyager's main recurring villain for the first few seasons. The problem comes in the form of a race that's defined by unwashed hair made up of sponges and dog toys. They're just not that interesting one-dimensional mustache-twirling bad guys. More than that, Janeway's decision to honor the Prime Directive by destroying the Caretaker's array could also be interpreted as breaking it, by taking sides against the Kazon, potentially altering the balance of power in the region. Even if her motives are noble, it's very morally questionable for Starfleet's first contact specialist. Number 3. Cretaceans. Neither the first or second contact with the Cretaceans go well for Captain Archer. They're easily incensed, and Johnny doesn't do much to help the situation for the second time. For the captain that forged the bonds between the Federation's founding worlds, he sure didn't know how to handle these wood-loving freaks. Similar to cultures on Earth that require people to go out in public with their head or face covered for modesty, in Voxala we find out the Cretaceans eat food in private and find the idea of a mess hall the same as a brothel. It makes one wonder if the race has underground fetish material that shows people going to town on a plate of spaghetti. Number 2. The Ferengi. I'm not sure who thought this would be a great new recurring villain race. Gene, yeah, that tracks. While they would go on to be a fairly interesting race in future iterations, the first contact and last outpost left a lot to be desired. While the first planned interaction would happen a few episodes later in the battle, the Enterprise ends up chasing a Ferengi ship that stole a power converter from a Federation world, only to get caught in TNG's version of Arena by an ancient power that forces the two races to face each other as both ships are drained of energy. Not even Armin Shimmerman, who would go on to play arguably the franchise's most famous Ferengi, could save the weird way the race was written and directed in their initial meeting with the Federation. And the worst first in the contact department? Lyarans. On the first official cultural exchange in TNG's liaisons, the Lyarans come off as a very special bunch. When Troy finds her limits of chocolate, you know something weird is going on. Rather than just sitting down around the conference room table and talking about how their culture does things and learn how Federation species do these things differently, these 3 different ambassadors go full immersion method acting to understand the cultural differences. The guy trying to give Troy enough sugar for a dozen root canals, and the one pushing all of Worf's buttons are some of Trek's most insufferable characters. And then there's the one that puts Picard in his own personal version of hell, being stuck on a planet with a woman that lusts over him. Jean-Luc has no idea what to do with this, and nor should he have to put up with the deception he's been put into. This is the second episode of TNG's final season, and while it's the worst of it, it also sets the tone for a mostly lower end of mediocre season. As we petition the Federation for entry into the best of First Contact, if you're enjoying the content, please consider a like and subscribe. At 5th best, Q. Encounter at Farpoint finally makes an appearance as the best of something. While Gene Roddenberry clearly leaned heavily on the character of Trelane from the TOS episode Squire of Gothos as a template for Q, John Delancey quickly became a fan favorite. The Q are one of the most interesting races in the franchise, and absolutely the only interesting thing in TNG's first episode. Between bookending TNG with Q's courtroom and showing us some of the expanded continuum in Voyager, the race cemented themselves as a pivotal part of the Trek universe. Number 4. Andorians. Maybe it's just that one of the first chronological Andorians we meet is played by the ever-present Jeffrey Combs, but Enterprise's The Andorian Incident is one of Star Trek's most nuanced first meetings of a new race. But even by the end of this first contact, Shran and Archer come to have an uncomfortable but serious respect for each other. It's really interesting to see how adversarial the first meeting between two Federation Charter members was. Number 3. The Dominion. While the Dominion consists of many species, we first meet 2 of the 3 major players in DS9's The Jem'Hadar. It certainly doesn't create the lasting positive relationship the Federation has a talent for in its first contacts, but it is fairly unique and sets up one of the biggest conflicts the galaxy has ever seen. The episode starts with a really happy-go-lucky plot of Jake doing a science project, and by the end a Galaxy-class ship is destroyed, and the Bajorans find out rather nonchalantly that their colony in the Gamma Quadrant has been wiped out. Absolutely the most consequential unintended first contact in known Federation history. Number 2. Malcorians. If you say, I like First Contact, you could be talking about the act this video is about, TNG's best movie, or in this case, one of TNG's best episodes. It highlights a planned first contact with a pre-warp civilization as they're about to make their first warp flight. While it's not the most pivotal or interesting episode ever, it is the episode I would recommend to someone that has never seen Star Trek before. It explains so many of the base beliefs of the Federation that underpin so many of the narratives through the rest of the franchise. While the Malcorians ultimately decide that they weren't ready to join the Great Galactic Stage, this is actually one of the strengths of the Federation's first contact policy to allow this society to decide what's best for them. And the best first contact? The Borg. Best certainly is a subjective term for the Federation here. Q bookends the best list as he tries to show the Federation, after nearly a century of expansion with few serious adversaries, that their mission statement of seeking out new life only works as long as that new life is at your level of advancement or less. This is probably the most direct and beneficial lesson Q tries to teach the crew of the Enterprise, and forcing this first contact gives Starfleet a chance to come up with even a concept of a plan to hold them off when they inevitably come to Federation space. Everything about this encounter is ominous, and Q-Who is one of the few bright spots in TNG's troubled initial seasons. What's your favorite first contact in Star Trek?